we hope to hear from you.
So shelf life of a website. I mean, what we're really asking is, we're asking the question that many of our clients ask us, which is how long should I expect my website to last, in the sense of not just sort of existing on the web, but how often do I need to re
Mhm.
something it? And the verb there maybe is part of the mystery of the question. But
Sure.
so when you think about like how long a website is a good website, like what do you think about?
In terms of what kind of makes up that shelf life, or
Yeah.
So I think, first and foremost, the code that the site is built upon is um, something that you need to factor in. Uh, you know, Websites, when you build them at the beginning, they are built upon all this different languages and different things in the background that your web developer probably dealt with that you didn't have to. But so they're built on HTML and CSS and different coding languages, and that makes up kind of a framework that the visuals and the interface and the content all sort of sit on top of, and when you build your site, that is something that at the time is built to be solid and good, and hence the word like framework. It's a good foundation. However, things change. Nothing in sort of coding and design really ever stays the same. So you have to anticipate that as those things that your site was built upon a couple of years ago, advances are made in CSS or changes to HTML and all of these things that you kind of have to then assess and factor in.
Yeah. And why that happens, why there is all that change, is it can come from a couple of different places. One might be that maybe there turned out to be a security flaw somewhere in the code and it needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Another might be that a new language has come along that allows different things, and other web developers want to use it, or people have to accommodate it in some way. There could also be that the equipment that the servers that it used to live on, they have needed to be upgraded, and so now we're moving to a new version. But typically, it kind of fits in with this larger thing of computer programs. We release new versions because we are either fixing the things that were broken or we're adding things that people have asked for.
Mm-hmm.
And so between those two things, that I think is hard for people to understand. It's kind of like, why do I need another version of Microsoft Word? Like, I'm typing in this one seems fine. But
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons about like the operating system of your computer maybe has changed, and that old code literally does not run on it anymore. You now need new code.
Yeah.
Or there were problems with that. There were maybe holes that people were exploiting with malware. There's a lot of reasons why, and all of that applies to websites too. So it's not like technologists are just trying to like take your money. It's more that all these different pressures mean that it needs to move forward in some way.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing too, when websites were launched, however many years ago, there was really not all the different devices that we have, and the sizes and the surfaces that we interact with a single website have really vastly changed, and that has meant a lot of new things that websites have to consider when or companies have to consider when designing and developing their website.
Right. Right. So when we're using a mouse, and remember, mice weren't always around for computers too, but for the web, they always were. When we're using a mouse or a touchpad, we can hover over things, hover our cursor over something, and something will drop down on the screen. But when you're on your phone, you can't hover with your finger. Like the phone can't tell that you're a half a centimeter above it. So hovering doesn't really work. You have to tap. Well, what does tapping mean? Like, how do you map the tap, if you will, to the mouse hover versus click? And so we need to then create new kinds of code and new mental metaphors and things for how we're going to change things to accommodate these new input devices and new display devices.
Yeah.
And then the screen size as well is kind of even more obvious. You're either on a desktop like this or you're on a phone like this. And And with the phone, we clearly can't just shrink everything down. We're going to need to rejigger everything so it fits. But then they had to create new kinds of standards and codes and framework to allow that to not be excruciatingly painful every time we create a site. Sites that were created in the old frameworks, it just doesn't, there's no easy, there are not that many easy patches that make it really still a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, you maybe have heard this, you know, sometimes business owners will say, well, my website currently works. It's a functioning website. Yes, it was built 15 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever it is, but it works. So why should I bring it up to standard or code, if you will?
Right. Well, I mean, when you say works, there's different kinds of works. So this code stuff that we've been talking about is part of it. It may be that when the site was set up, there weren't the things for people to have a screen reader. So for example, if someone is visually impaired or is old and can't see tiny letters, like me, you know, the site was not built to adjust to different types of accessibility and usability. And so when you say works, it only works for certain people on certain devices. And that's no longer what we consider working. So, and if you say, well, I don't care, I only want to do this, then you're excluding a large portion of a potential maybe audience or market for yourself. And also, according to what Google was just saying in the core web vitals, you may no longer be showing up in the search engine as high as you used to, just because Google can see that. Google can see that you have not adapted to the newer, your site has not adapted to the newer technologies and is not as accessible as it needs to be. And it's now they're going to give you demerits for that. And now all of a sudden, where you were on page 1, now you're on page 10.
Right, because Google doesn't want to send people to your site if they're not going to have a good experience. And you know, even before the core web vitals, you know, Google was dropping sites down in ranking that were not responsive on the different devices. So that's already a thing. That's already happened before. So yeah.
So those are technological reasons. There's also like the media itself, like. For a while, there was some weirdness around video, like how are you going to watch video? And so the code and the standards and all got better so that it became easier for someone to put a video on their website and it to be used on all these devices that, by the way, all handle video files differently, encodings and things. That's all the magic behind the scenes, which I kind of view as similar to like what's happening underneath the car hood. You know, I have no idea. I have a vague sense of like combustion engines or diesel versus gas or those things versus electrical, but it's very vague. So that is also kind of how I view video on the web and on a phone. Like it's like, well, the video just plays, right? Well, it's not like a VHS tape. There's a lot that's going on to allow that a file to be able to work on these different devices that all have different kinds of chips and buses and things inside them where the data is moving around. And
there's a lot happening. Yeah.
We're glad that other people are solving that for us.
Yes. All right. So, so when we're talking about shelf life, we're talking about the code. That's one thing we're talking about,
it's the biggest and the most obvious one.
It is the first thing that we're going to be assessing. And then we also look at design. What are we looking at when we're looking at design?
Well, it can be a lot of things. It's pretty quick to see, and I maybe while you're talking, I can pull up a screen, but when you look at a site that was developed in, say, well, certainly a site that was developed in 1996 when the web first came around versus a website that was developed now, it's going to be very obvious to you which one's which, right? The one in 1996, I think there were like 3 fonts that we could use, maybe even 1. There was no like placing things. Pictures were very, small, and they were kind of dropped in the middle of a sentence. There just was not a lot of visual
interest.
And I'll be honest, I actually got a chance to see the web in 1990. I guess it was 1995, early 95. At work at Next, I saw a very, very early web browser, and I was in the art and production department at the time, and so I saw this and I was like, then I was trying to imagine how would we do any of our like help pages or any kind of design on this. And I was like, that's never going to work. Nobody's going to be able to use that thing. Oh my God, it's so ugly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I think it would be very obvious if you put up the 1996 website next to the 2020 website, which one was designed when, and you could start kind of comparing the different design features. I think about cell phones, mobile phones designs too. When I think about just design is a thing that changes and that's ever evolving, and then our opinion of design is subjective and different, right? But if you think about the early iPhone, I can remember getting that first iPhone, and it was thicker, and it was heavier, and the touch screen was different then. So if you pull up, so just like if you could pull up the 1996 website next to the Today website, you do the same thing with your 2004 iPhone to your 2020 iPhone, and obviously it's like we're on 12 now. We were on, I don't know, what was the first one? 1.
you didn't have a number.
Didn't have a number, right? But so much, and just even within owning your single X or whatever, all of the software updates, all of the things that change, and that can happen just in the owning one phone. So it's not that dissimilar from website design and being able to stay current without being sort of led around by trends. I think that's kind of an important thing. You have to consider your brand styles, and what we're commonly working with clients on is, they come to us with a brand and now they want to do a website, and we have to kind of translate their brand for the web experience. And so that is important to think about when you're designing a website. But then when you're looking at, okay, well, is my site as fresh from a design perspective as it could be? You're looking at different things.
Does it look like, when people look at my competitors' websites and at my website, do I look, is my website positioning me where I think I should be? Mm-hmm. Like you with some competitor, maybe it's you're saying, yes, they are the flashy one and we are the stable one. Well, but does your site, actually use the visual conventions that make it seem like the appropriate, formal, trustworthy thing that it is? Or does it for some reason not look like that? Has it gone, is it using technologies that we're no longer using, or parts of it like just seeming wrong? Mm-hmm. Have you changed which fonts you tend to use in the printed materials that you use so that they no longer match what you were using on the website? So those little changes that you might do along the way, and kind of the evolution of your brand, your website needs to catch up with that too. It may not mean an entire overhaul of the whole website, but at least some almost maintenance of the visual characteristics of it.
Right. I mean, I think to what you're saying, if your brand philosophy is that, you're the contemporary, the modern, the, sort of cutting edge in your field for your product, your service, and then someone goes to your website and that's not the impression that the website is giving, then you're going to just have a hard time converting that person to somebody that buys from you.
It just creates that tiny little bit of a barrier that might be the one
mm-hmm.
thing that slows them down and flips the switch, even if it's subtle, even if it's just it's only part of a larger equation. But it's all part of the things that could help to lead to that conversion of you getting a sale.
That's right.
So there's the technology underlying the site, there's the visual aspects of the site, and then there's the content of the site, like the things that are actually being said or shown on the website. Like, are those fresh? Are they current?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are they following best practices to be, optimized in search? Is the content the kind of content that your audience wants and is interested in? So I think when you first launch a website, you have high hopes that what you put on it is the right content, and you're not just hopefully putting up content willy-nilly. You're kind of thinking it through and saying, okay, this is how we want to, this is how we talk about our brand in printed materials. This is what it's going to look like on the web. Here are the types of content we're going to put in our article section or our blog. And you really put a lot of thought into it. But then people start visiting your website and you are gathering data. And you're seeing what are the things that people are interested in, where are they not visiting at all, where are they going to a lot, what are the common questions that perhaps your website content isn't currently answering, but it could. So you gather all this great data, and so you should use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the sort of the architecture of the site too can be affected in those ways. So let's imagine that you have started a website and you're kind of decide, okay, we're going to have a blog area on it so that we can show our thought leadership. And at the beginning, because there's not a lot of posts there because you've just started, you think, well, I don't want to make that be too prominent on the site because I don't need people to see it. But then let's imagine that over time you actually do follow through on that plan. By the way, this is Max. He would like to come and talk with us about website freshness too. You followed through on that plan and you built up your blog. But your blog you originally had just kind of hidden in a corner of the site. And so you're putting all this great work and yet it's not getting integrated into the experience of someone who's coming to your site maybe for the first time. Maybe it's showing up in search results, which is awesome. But for people who come from other aspects, they're not getting the full benefit of the effort that you put in there. So sometimes your site needs to be rethought given changes since you put it together.
Right. Don't put baby in a corner, as one of my favorite movies would say. So I think that, information architecture, that feels like a thing that you might only have to do once. Cool. Well, I just put this really great architecture together when I build the site the first time, so I don't need to worry about that anymore. And that's just not the case.
Right. It doesn't, and we're not saying I think that you need to change it every month or, really even every quarter. I think though that it is worthwhile revisiting it. And if your site was built in such a way that there's some flexibility to it, it's not that you'll need to redesign the whole thing, but you might want to reposition or just take some key, kind of like doing an addition on your home as opposed to tearing your home down and building a new one or moving to an entirely new space.
Right.
It's more like, how can we, we've got this back door, can we put an addition on the back and have that just be a passageway?
Yeah, I think the house is a good example. Metaphor?
Metaphor or analogy. Verbs we use.
I think it's a good thing to use. The thing is too, if you own a home or even if you own an apartment or rent an apartment, you sometimes want to freshen it up, want to do something new, want to change it up a little bit, and it delights you and the people that come there.
Right. Keep the things that delight you and the people that come there, and get rid of the things that don't.
That's right. Right. So, so there's, I guess, this is a question. If you have invested in a website and then you continue to invest in making some of these updates that we're talking about, maybe it's not like wholesale redesign every time you do something. It's more like, okay, we're going to tweak this. We're going to be paying attention to the information architecture and where people are, getting stuck and making sure that it's easy to flow through the site and that content is findable and all the good things. If you're doing that and you're paying attention on a regular basis to those things, then perhaps if you are investing in that regularly, does that mean you don't need to overhaul your site, insert X number of years?
Well, I think that's a great debate, a great discussion. Yes, I would say that there is after a certain point, a point where you're going to have to deal with change in technology. And it doesn't matter how much you do the maintenance for different pieces. This is kind of like a car more than a house. Your house isn't going to, if you're doing the maintenance on your house, it's going to last you a super long time. And I think that's what people typically think when they make a major expense like building a brand new website. It's a big deal to them. They've put in a lot of money and they expect that to last a long time.
Sure.
So you want to make sure that you're being built on frameworks and technologies and good code, so that in a smart way, so that small changes can happen, medium changes can happen without having to redo the whole thing from scratch. But like a car, like you can, and I can remember the old Click and Clack radio show, like they would try to keep those cars working as long as possible, like even like pull out the engine, or I don't even know all the words, like I said earlier, but
yeah.
And so just changing, keeping gas in and changing the oil and getting new tires and is good. And washing the car, apparently, is very important. So I'm told. After a while, literally things are no longer going to work. In the case of a car, it's because there's physical wear and tear. In the case of a website, it's because the servers and the code on which the site has to run, because the internet is distributed, but it is a thing. Those have changed, and the things that your old code was using are no longer there. So it's more like we can no longer run VHS tapes, because the tape itself stretches and is no longer, just can't do it.
Right. So I'm sorry, I'm distracted by Max's cute little paw, and it's just distracting and cute. But so I guess when we're talking about budget for a website and the things to consider, what we're perhaps advocating for is, making beyond that initial investment that you make to design and develop the website in the first place, that you also set aside money to keep up with it regularly, the content freshness, looking at the analytics, making sure that you're able to respond to things like the core web vitals. All of those things should be budgeted for on a monthly basis. And then as far as sort of responding to these larger changes in frameworks and browser things and all of the other stuff that you're talking about from a more technical aspect, we would suggest what in terms of budget?
Well, it depends on the site, but so you have to budget, I think if you
time frame, I'm saying time frame.
If you've got a good framework, I would say it could go, I might be on the longer side on this. I might say 5 years. But it's going to need some significant, it's again, like a car, like you may have to replace the transmission at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so 5 years, if you've also been keeping up with the maintenance and all of the paint,
and if it was built in a way that it can adapt in many ways, that it can handle adding new things in.
Yes. If you're not keeping up with it on a regular basis, the shelf life is perhaps
it's going to be much shorter. I don't think, you can get away with 2 years, but if you're not really updating the site, then we come back to the question of, is your site still working? Is it
useful for the user, for the visitor?
Can people even read it on their devices? Is there anything there that they're going to use? And is it showing up in the search or not? If it doesn't ever change and people come to it and then they immediately bounce and go away, then I think you could argue that your site, while it is visible on the web, is no longer working in a larger sense of working.
Right. So we are, I guess, going on record saying that a shelf life of a site that isn't updated frequently, maybe 2 to 3 years, and a site that does get the love and care and attention and feeding that it needs, more like 5.
5 and maybe a little bit more, but it's going to need it's going to need some help along the way.
Some fine tuning.
Yeah.
All right.